The first sign that my world had been hollowed out came through the phone, a sterile voice delivering a verdict without a trial. "Ma'am," the bank teller said, a practiced patience in her tone that felt more like pity. "I've checked both the savings and the checking accounts. The balance is zero." I stood in my kitchen, the morning sun slanting through the window and illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. A perfectly normal Tuesday turned upside down by a single, impossible sentence. The silence on my end of the line stretched until it was thin and sharp enough to cut. How could 50 years of careful saving, of my late husband's overtime, and my own frugal habits simply vanish into thin air? Before I dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps me keep sharing more. My hand, holding the cordless phone, was trembling so hard I had to brace it against the kitchen counter. The linoleum felt cold and unyielding beneath my feet. "There must be a mistake," I whispered, my voice a dry rustle of leaves. The teller sighed, a soft puff of air traveling miles to deliver my ruin. "The transfers were authorized yesterday afternoon, Patricia. A full withdrawal. It was initiated online by your son, Leo." The name hung in the air between us, a wrecking ball painted to look like a lifeline. Leo. My son. The boy I'd rocked to sleep, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose first heartbreak I'd soothed with ice cream and reassurances. The man he had become was a stranger to me now, a phantom who shared my son's face, but not his heart. I ended the call without another word, the plastic of the phone slick in my palm. My gaze drifted across the quiet house, a museum of a life that no longer felt like mine. Every object screamed his betrayal. I focused on a framed photograph on the mantelpiece, my chosen sensory anchor in a sea of disbelief. It was of Leo at his high school graduation, his smile wide and genuine, his arm slung around my shoulders. He was holding his diploma like a trophy, and I remembered the blinding pride that had filled my chest that day, a warmth so fierce I thought I might burst. Now, looking at his image, all I could see were the shadows in his eyes, the ones I had willfully ignored. The sight of it made my stomach clench. Was I too soft all these years? Did I raise him wrong? I had always made excuses for him, especially after his father passed. His moodiness, his string of failed jobs, his sudden obsession with that girl, Chloe. She had arrived like a storm front, all dark clothes and a tight, dismissive smile. I never liked the way she looked at our things, with a hunger that had nothing to do with appreciation. Her eyes would scan a room and catalog its worth, and I felt like another item on that list, one to be discarded when its value was spent. I walked through the house on unsteady legs, my own home now feeling like a crime scene. I was the only victim, and the perpetrator was my own flesh and blood. His bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, a cold draft washing over me. The room was unnervingly neat, stripped of personality. The posters were gone from the walls, the drawers of his dresser hung open and empty. He hadn't just left, he had erased himself. It was a calculated departure, a quiet, brutal severing. The silence in the room was a sound in itself, a roaring emptiness where a life used to be. I ran a hand over the smooth, cool wood of his empty desk, my fingers tracing patterns in a thin layer of dust. He took everything. But it wasn't just the money, was it? No, that was just the tool. What he had really stolen was my past, my sense of safety, my belief that the love between a mother and her child was unconditional. What would you have done if your own son did this to you? Would you find it in your heart to forgive, or would the betrayal burn too deep? My grandson, 10-year-old Alex, was sitting quietly on the living room sofa when I returned, his small legs dangling inches above the floor. He hadn't come with his father. Leo had dropped him off 2 days ago, claiming he and Chloe had a business opportunity out of state. A weekend trip, he'd said. A lie, stacked on 1,000 other lies. Alex held a book in his lap, but he wasn't reading. His eyes, so much like my late husband's, were fixed on my face, full of a quiet, knowing sadness that was far too old for his years. He had heard the phone call. He knew. I tried to smile for him, a pathetic, crumbling effort that felt like a betrayal in itself. How could I protect him from this when I couldn't even protect myself? My gaze swept my own bedroom. looking for what else was missing. That's when I saw it. The small, velvet-lined box on my dresser where I kept my mother's wedding ring, and the locket my husband gave me on our first anniversary, was open and empty. A wave of nausea washed over me, stronger than before. The money was one thing, a number on a screen. This was different. This was history. This was sacrilege. And then, nestled in the bare velvet indentation where the ring had rested for decades, I saw a small, crisply folded piece of paper. It was a note. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. It was his handwriting. I knew it instantly, the familiar, lazy slant of his letters. I reached for it, my fingers numb, a chilling premonition crawling up my spine, telling me that whatever words were written on that page would be far more devastating than the teller's. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the note, the sound of the crisp paper crackling in the oppressive silence of the room. It was the only sound in the world, a tiny, tearing noise that seemed to be coming from inside my own chest. The words, written in my son's familiar scrawl, weren't an apology or an explanation. They were a judgment. "Mother," it began, the formality of it a slap in the face. "I know this will be hard for you to understand, but this was necessary. You smothered Dad with your constant worrying until his heart gave out, and you've been doing the same to me ever since. This money isn't stolen, it's my inheritance, the one he would have wanted me to have so I could finally be free. Chloe gets it. She sees me for who I am, not who you want me to be. We're starting a new life. And you're not a part of it. Don't try to find us. It's better this way, Leo." Each word was a perfectly crafted stone, and he had thrown them all directly at me. My breath hitched in my throat. The sound of my own ragged gasp was ugly and loud in the quiet house. He blamed me for his father's death. The thought was so monstrous, so fundamentally untrue, that my mind couldn't fully absorb it. Frank's heart had been weak for years, a fact we had all lived with, a quiet dread that sat at our dinner table every night. I had cared for him. I had loved him. But in Leo's version of the story, my love had been a poison, a suffocating blanket. The grandfather clock in the hallway began to chime, its deep, resonant bongs marking 3 in the afternoon. Each chime was a tolling bell for the life I once had. I sank onto the edge of my bed, the note still clutched in my hand, the paper now limp and damp from the sweat of my palm. A wave of grief, so profound it felt like drowning, washed over me. It wasn't just for the money or the ring, or even for the son I had lost. It was a grief for Frank, for the memory of our life together, now so viciously rewritten by the son we had created. I could almost hear Frank's voice, a low, gentle rumble, telling me not to worry so much. "Patty," he would say, "the boy will find his way." But Frank was gone, and our boy had found his way to a darkness I couldn't have imagined. Do you believe a person is born cruel, or does someone teach them how to be that way? I looked at Chloe's phantom image in my mind, her sharp face and cold eyes, and I knew she had been the one whispering in his ear, nurturing the seeds of resentment that had apparently been growing there all along. She hadn't just stolen my son, she had given him the justification he needed to destroy his mother. I looked over at my grandson, Alex, who had silently padded into the room and was now standing in the doorway. He didn't speak. He just watched me, his expression unreadable. What was he thinking? How much of his father's poison had seeped into him? The thought was a fresh stab of panic. I had to protect him. But how? The chime of the clock had faded, replaced by the relentless ticking of its pendulum. Tick, tock, each second a reminder of my new reality. No money for the mortgage. Tick. The electric bill was due Friday. Tock. There was barely enough food in the refrigerator to last through tomorrow. The scope of his betrayal was no longer just emotional. It was a practical, terrifying crisis. He hadn't just left us with nothing. He had left us in a hole so deep I couldn't see a way out. I smoothed the crumpled note on my knee, my eyes tracing the cruel curve of his signature. Leo. A name that means lion. He was supposed to be strong, noble. But he was just a scavenger, picking over the bones of the family he'd abandoned. I felt a coldness spread through my veins, extinguishing the initial fiery shock of the betrayal and replacing it with something hard and dense. Regret was a useless emotion. Grief was a luxury I couldn't afford. The only thing left was a quiet, simmering rage. He had misjudged me. He had seen a frail, aging widow he could easily discard. He had forgotten where he got his own stubborn streak from. He had forgotten that I was Frank's wife, and we had weathered far worse storms than this. Alex came over and placed his small, warm hand on my arm, a silent anchor in my swirling despair. I looked from his concerned face to the hateful note in my hand. He would not pay for his father's sins. I would not let this be the story of our lives. I would fight. Just as that resolve began to solidify in my heart, a sharp, piercing sound shattered the funereal silence of the house. It was the doorbell, ringing with an insistent, sharp trill that made me jump. Once, then twice. No one ever came by unannounced. My heart leaped into my throat. Every nerve-ending screamed that whoever was on the other side of that door was connected to this nightmare. I used to have a little game I played with Leo when he was small, a ritual for whenever the doorbell rang. I'd lift him up to the peephole and whisper, "Who's the mystery guest?" It was a silly thing, a way to turn a mundane moment into a small adventure while teaching him a lesson about caution. That calm, domestic memory flooded my mind as I stood frozen in the hallway, the bell's echo still vibrating in the air. Now, the thought of who might be on the other side filled me with a primal dread. The cold, brass doorknob felt like a block of ice under my sweating palm, and I could taste the coppery tang of fear in the back of my throat. I told Alex to stay in the living room, my voice a low, urgent command. He retreated without a word, his small form disappearing behind the archway. I took a shaky breath, the crumpled note from Leo still clutched in my other hand, its sharp edges digging into my skin like a physical reminder of the new, harsh reality. Peeking through the peephole, the distorted fisheye lens showed me a woman. She was alone, which offered a sliver of relief. She was middle-aged, impeccably dressed in a dark blazer, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe, elegant twist. She looked like she could be from a homeowners association or a charity, but a shiver traced its way down my spine that had nothing to do with the draft from the door. Have you ever had that feeling in your gut? A primal warning that the person smiling at you is a threat? That's what I felt as I turned the lock. I opened the door only a few inches, keeping the security chain latched. "Can I help you?" The woman's smile was polished and bright, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were chips of slate, cold and analytical, and they flickered past me for a moment, scanning the inside of my home. "Patricia, is it?" she asked, her voice smooth as silk. "I'm looking for Leo and Chloe. I was told they'd be here." Her tone was casual, but it was a performance. I felt it in my bones. "They're not here," I said, my own voice tight. I tried to sound firm, like a woman who was in control of her own home, not one whose world had just been shattered by its former occupants. The woman's smile didn't falter. "Oh? That's a shame. We have some rather urgent business to conclude." She took a small step forward, a subtle act of intimidation. "Perhaps you know where they went? They seem to be in quite a hurry." The way she said it, a slight, knowing emphasis on the word hurry, told me she knew. She knew about the money. "I have no idea where they are," I lied, the words feeling clumsy and foreign in my mouth. She tilted her head, a gesture that might have seemed curious on anyone else, but on her, looked predatory. "That's unfortunate, because they have something that belongs to my associate. They were supposed to make a delivery." My mind reeled. A delivery? What was she talking about? "I don't know anything about that," I said, my grip tightening on the door. "All I know is my son is gone." The woman's facade of politeness finally began to crack. A flicker of impatience crossed her face. "Let's not play games, Patricia. We know Leo cleared out your accounts yesterday, a substantial sum, but that was just the first step in our arrangement. The money was meant to secure a purchase, but they never showed up to the meeting point. They have the money, and they have the merchandise they were supposed to exchange it for." Merchandise? The word sounded so clinical, so dangerous. This wasn't about a family dispute anymore. My son hadn't just run off. He had walked straight into a world I knew nothing about. A world with smiling women in blazers who came to collect. Leo wasn't just a thief. He was a pawn in something much, much bigger. And he was a fool. A stupid, arrogant boy who thought he could outsmart people like this. A wave of pity, sickening and unwelcome, washed over me before being consumed by the cold tide of her next words. She leaned closer to the crack in the door, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You need to understand something. Your son wasn't tricked into this. He wasn't some innocent boy led astray by a bad girl. She paused, letting the words sink in, twisting the knife. He came to us. He'd been watching my associate's operations for months, looking for a way in. He pitched this entire plan himself. He's been planning to leave you with nothing for over a year. The air left my lungs. A year. For a whole year, while he was eating my food, living under my roof, letting me mend his shirts, he was plotting this. Every kind word, every hug, every shared memory from the past 12 months was a lie. A carefully constructed piece of theater designed to keep me docile until he was ready to bring the curtain down. That was the true betrayal, a venom that seeped into the past and poisoned everything. The woman straightened up, her point made. She slid a thin, elegant business card through the opening in the door. It fell to the floor, landing face up on the welcome mat. If you hear from him, she said, her voice once again coolly professional, tell him Mr. Sterling is not a patient man. He has 24 hours to deliver what he promised, or the terms of our agreement will change, drastically. She turned and walked away without another word, her heels clicking a sharp final rhythm on the pavement. I was left staring at the business card, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was stark white, with a single name embossed in black ink, Silas Sterling, and below it, an insignia of a wolf's head. The name meant nothing to me, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, that my son had not run away with my life savings. He had sold his soul for it, and the devil had just come to collect. My late husband, Frank, was a man of unwavering routine. He read the paper at the same time every morning, walked the same route every evening, and kept his tools in the same immaculate order in the garage. His life, I believed, was an open book I had read 1,000 times. But Frank had a secret, a single deviation from his transparent existence. Months after his funeral, while dusting his old military portrait, my fingers had brushed against a small lump on the back of the frame. It was a key, taped securely, with a folded piece of paper beside it. The note, in his familiar, steady hand, read, "For a storm you can't see coming. Where we first built our foundation." I'd been consumed by grief then, and I dismissed it as a sentimental puzzle I didn't have the heart to solve. I put the key in my jewelry box, the now empty jewelry box, and forgot all about it. Now, standing in the aftermath of the woman's visit, her chilling words echoing in the silence, Frank's secret came rushing back not as a memory, but as a lifeline. The white business card lay on the floor, the sight of the name Silas Sterling and the wolf insignia making my blood run cold. They had given Leo 24 hours. My son was not just a thief. He was bait in a trap, and the hunters were circling. Panic was a useless luxury. I looked from the card to Frank's portrait on the wall. His eyes, young and serious in his army uniform, seemed to stare right at me. He had always been the planner, the one who saw 3 steps ahead. Do you think it's possible to truly know the people you love? Or does everyone have a secret room inside them? I suddenly felt that I had only ever known the foyer of the man I was married to for 45 years. I went to my bedroom, my movements stiff and robotic. My jewelry box was a wasteland of empty velvet slots, but tucked into a corner compartment, beneath a loose lining, was the small, cold brass key. I clutched it in my hand. Where we first built our foundation. The phrase tumbled in my mind. It wasn't the house itself. Our foundation. It was something we literally built. The fireplace. In the first year of our marriage, we'd been so poor, we couldn't afford a contractor to finish the basement. Frank, using skills he'd learned from his father, had laid the brick for the hearth himself, with me beside him, mixing the mortar. It was the first thing we had ever truly built together. Alex was watching a cartoon in the living room, the cheerful noise a jarring contrast to the dread coiling in my stomach. I told him I needed to look for something in the basement and left him there, a small, unknowing sentry in our besieged home. The basement was cool and smelled of damp earth and cedar. I ran my hands along the rough brick of the fireplace, my fingers searching for anything out of place. Frank had been a meticulous craftsman, and there it was. One brick, near the bottom, was ever so slightly recessed. its mortar a slightly different shade of gray. I pressed on it, and it shifted inward with a soft scrape. Behind it was a dark, hollow space, just large enough to hold a small metal box. It was an old army surplus ammo can, painted black. It was heavy. My heart hammered as I carried it to the workbench and inserted the key. The lock turned with a well-oiled click. I lifted the lid, half expecting to see a thick stack of cash, a secret nest egg. But Frank was smarter than that. The contents were far more strategic. On top lay a bundle of $100 bills, thick enough to handle our immediate problems, but not enough to draw attention. Beneath the cash was a folded deed, the paper yellowed with age. My breath caught. It was for a small one-room cabin in the mountains upstate, a place we had bought for a pittance decades ago and had barely used. I'd forgotten it even existed. But the deed wasn't in both our names. Frank had put it solely in mine years ago. It was a safe house, completely off the grid, and under the deed was the last item. A small, outdated flip phone, heavy and solid as a rock. Tucked beside it was one final folded note. This one felt different. Heavier. I unfolded it, my eyes scanning his last words to me. "Patty," it read, "if you're reading this, then the boy has finally broken your heart." I saw the weakness in him, the hunger that looked too much like greed. I prayed I was wrong. I see now that my prayers went unanswered. This box is your escape. The money is your fuel, the cabin is your shelter. But this phone is your sword. There is only one number in it. It belongs to a man named Marcus Thorne. We served together. He went one way, I went another. But we swore an oath to each other. He is a dangerous man, Patty. More dangerous than any of the wolves that are surely circling now. But his loyalty to me is absolute. Call him. Tell him Frank's storm has come. He'll know what to do. He owes me. I sank onto a dusty crate, the cold metal of the phone in one hand and the note in the other. My quiet, gentle Frank, a man who I thought kept no secrets, had left me a ghost key to a hidden world. He hadn't just left me a contingency plan. He had left me an army of one. The small, heavy phone felt alien in my hand. It opened with a stiff, plastic snap, a sound from a bygone era. The screen glowed a pale, pixelated green, displaying a fully charged battery and a single contact. M. I stared at it for a long moment, the basement's silence pressing in on me. My husband had left me a key to a world he'd kept locked away my entire life. When your entire world is on fire, do you run from the flames, or do you pick up the first weapon you can find? With a trembling thumb, I pressed the call button. There was no dial tone, no ringing. Just a faint crackle of static, and then a voice answered. A low, gravelly sound like stones grinding together at the bottom of a river. "Frank's dead," the voice stated, flat and devoid of emotion. "Who is this?" The bluntness of it stole my breath. There was no greeting, no question, just a cold, hard fact. This was a man who lived in a world without pleasantries. This is Patricia," I stammered, my own voice sounding thin and reedy in the dusty air. "Frank's wife." I remembered the words from the note, a password to a secret club I never knew existed. "His storm has come." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, a silence so profound I thought he might have hung up. The only sound was the frantic, panicked drumming of my own heart against my ribs. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked, a reminder that my grandson was playing, oblivious to the fact that his grandmother was currently negotiating with a ghost. Then, the gravelly voice returned, cutting through the silence. "Silas Sterling." He said it like he was reading my mind. "Frank always said that boy's ambition was a sickness. Tell me what he did, Patricia. Exactly." I recounted the story in a low, shaking whisper. The empty accounts, the cruel note, the woman at the door with her cold eyes, and her 24-hour deadline. I told him about the merchandise and the delivery that never happened. The man, Marcus, listened without interruption. I could hear the faint sound of him breathing, a slow, steady rhythm that was somehow calming. When I finished, he spoke again, his voice tight with something I couldn't decipher. "Did Frank have any collections? Anything small, valuable, easy to transport?" My mind immediately went to the mahogany case in Frank's study. "His maps," I whispered. "He collected antique maritime charts. His grandfather was a sea captain. Marcus cursed, a short, sharp sound. That's it. Sterling doesn't deal in cash. He traffics in history, in stolen art and antiquities. Your son wasn't just a thief, Patricia. He was a mule. Sterling likely used him and your accounts to acquire something, probably one of those maps, planning to pay Leo a finder's fee. But the boy got greedy. He took the money and the map. The full scope of it hit me like a physical blow. Leo hadn't just stolen my future. He had stolen his father's past. He had taken the one thing Frank cherished, a legacy passed down through generations, and had tossed it into a fire sale with criminals. That desecration felt deeper and more painful than the theft of the money. It was a betrayal of our entire family, of the very bedrock on which our lives had been built. What do I do? I asked, the question a plea. Sterling will tear this city apart looking for that map, and he'll start with you. The man's voice lost its detached, analytical tone and became a sharp, urgent command. Is the boy with you? Yes, I said. My grandson, Alex. He's 10. Okay, Marcus said, a new, harder edge to his voice. Listen to me very carefully. The woman who visited you wasn't a collector. She was a scout. She was there to assess you, to see if you were a threat or a victim. Her report back to Sterling will be that you're a scared old woman, easy to pressure. But they don't leave things to chance. Your house is already being watched. They're waiting for Leo to contact you. The air in the basement suddenly felt thin. Hard to breathe. The small, grimy window near the ceiling no longer looked like a source of light, but like an eye watching me. You need to leave, Marcus said, his voice dropping lower. Right now. You and the boy. You have 20 minutes at most before they change tactics from watching to entering. A cold dread, more potent than anything I had felt before, seized me. This was no longer a drama about a broken family. This was about survival. Where do we go? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The cabin? No, he snapped. They'll expect that. They'll check any property in your name. You are going to walk out your front door with the boy and the box Frank left you. Nothing else. Leave your car, leave your purse. Walk to the bus stop at the end of your street and take the first bus that comes. I don't care which direction it's going. When you're on it, and only when you're moving, you will call me back on this phone. Do you understand me, Patricia? Yes, I said, the word catching in my dry throat. Good, he replied. One more thing. When you walk out that door, smile. Look like you're taking your grandson for ice cream. They are watching you, and they are waiting for you to look scared. He hung up. The line went dead. The silence it left behind, a roaring, terrifying void. I stood there for a second, frozen, before the primal need to protect my grandson jolted me into motion. I had to get Alex. We had to run. The last time I'd taken Alex on a surprise adventure, I'd woken him up early for a trip to the zoo. I remember the sweet, innocent excitement in his eyes, the way his small hand felt in mine as we walked to the car. Now, standing at the top of the basement stairs, I had to manufacture that same maternal warmth, but the words tasted like ash in my mouth. Have you ever had to lie to a child for their own safety? It's a unique kind of heartbreak. I found him in the living room, his gaze fixed on the television, but his body tense, a small soldier sensing the battle ahead. I knelt before him, forcing a smile so wide my cheeks ached. Guess what, sweetie? I said, my voice a brittle imitation of cheerful. We're going on a little trip, a surprise, just you and me. He looked from my face to the heavy tote bag in my hand, the one containing the cold, hard weight of Frank's ammo box. His gaze was unnervingly perceptive. He didn't ask about the zoo. He just nodded, a silent acceptance that chilled me more than any question could have. He knew this wasn't a game. He slipped his small, cool hand into mine, and his touch was both a comfort and a crushing weight of responsibility. Marcus's words echoed in my head. Smile. Look like you're taking your grandson for ice cream. As I locked the front door behind us, I left the key sitting on the hall table, a final, silent surrender of the life I'd known. Every step down the familiar walkway was an act of will. I felt 1,000 unseen eyes on my back, the skin between my shoulder blades prickling with paranoia. A dark sedan was parked halfway down the block, its tinted windows opaque and menacing. Was it them, or just a neighbor's visitor? I couldn't afford to know. I pointed up at a string of chattering sparrows on a telephone wire. Look, Alex, I said, my voice trembling slightly. They're having a noisy conversation. He squeezed my hand, but didn't look up. We were a tableau of perfect domesticity, a grandmother and her grandson on an afternoon stroll. But my heart was a frantic drum, and the heavy tote bag banged against my leg, a constant bruising reminder of our flight. The bus stop sign at the corner seemed miles away. The wait was the worst part. Standing there, exposed on the corner, I felt naked, vulnerable. The seconds stretched into agonizing minutes. The sedan was still there, a silent, dark predator in my peripheral vision. I hummed a nursery rhyme under my breath, the tune absurdly cheerful as I planned our next move. When the deep, wheezing hiss of the bus's air brakes finally sounded, it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It was a lumbering metal savior. I fumbled in the tote bag for $2 bills from Frank's stash, my fingers clumsy and stiff. The bus driver nodded at us, his face bored and impassive. We found a pair of sticky vinyl seats in the middle of the bus, the air thick with the smell of diesel and damp coats. I pulled Alex close to me, away from the window. As the bus lurched forward, pulling away from the curb and leaving my street, my home, my entire life behind, a wave of dizzying relief washed over me, so powerful I felt my knees weaken. We were moving. We were safe, for now. I waited until we had traveled at least a dozen blocks, the familiar neighborhood dissolving into a landscape of anonymous storefronts and strangers. I pulled out the burner phone, shielding it from view. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages as I found the single contact and pressed call. Marcus answered instantly. "Talk to me, Patricia." "We're on a bus," I said, my voice low and rushed. "Heading east. We got away." "Good," he said, but there was no relief in his tone, only a grim, tightly coiled tension. "You did the hard part, but the situation has changed." A cold knot formed in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "I made some calls the moment we hung up," he said, his voice a low, urgent rasp over the phone. "I reached out to some old contacts, people who keep their ears to the ground in Sterling's world. Your son, he's more reckless than I thought. He didn't just take the money and the map." He paused, and in that brief silence, I could hear the city rumbling past my window, a world that was moving on while mine had stopped. He made a second deal. He contacted one of Sterling's biggest rivals, a man even more ruthless, and offered to sell him the map. He was trying to play them against each other, to start a bidding war. The breath left my body in a rush. It wasn't just a theft. It wasn't just a double cross. It was a declaration of war. My foolish, greedy son hadn't just betrayed his family. He had betrayed his co-conspirators, the most dangerous men in the city. Marcus's final words landed like hammer blows, shattering any lingering hope I had that Leo was simply a misguided fool. "He didn't just stumble into this, Patricia. He kicked the hornet's nest to see what would happen. He's not a pawn in their game anymore. He's the prize. And that means you and the boy are no longer just leverage. You're the board itself." The bus rumbled on, a bubble of yellow light moving through the darkening city. Alex had finally succumbed to exhaustion, his head resting heavily in my lap, his soft breathing a fragile rhythm against the chaos of my thoughts. Marcus's words from the phone call replayed in my mind, a declaration that had shifted the very ground beneath me. "Frank wasn't just a soldier, Patricia," he'd said, his voice a low crackle of static and secrets. "His official file says logistics, but that was a cover. He was a cartographer for military intelligence. His job wasn't just to read maps, he made them. He designed them to pass on secrets in plain sight." I stared out the window, but I wasn't seeing the blur of streetlights and neon signs. I was seeing my husband in a new light, a man I had shared a bed with for nearly 5 decades, yet had never fully known. The quiet man who loved crossword puzzles and meticulously weeded his garden had a secret life, one of codes and shadows. "The map your son stole," Marcus continued. "It isn't just an antique, it's almost certainly one of Frank's. A key disguised as a collectible, and he taught you how to read it, you just don't know it yet." The idea was preposterous. I was a retired librarian. My life was ordered by the Dewey Decimal System, not espionage. But then, Marcus brought up the games. "Remember the drives you'd take on Sundays? He'd have you navigate with an old paper map instead of the GPS. He'd point out street names, asking you which ones didn't fit a pattern. Flora, fauna, orchard, and then Smith Street. He was training your eye, Patricia. Teaching you to spot the anomaly. That's the basis of all code breaking. It was true. I had always thought of it as one of Frank's charming quirks, his love for an analog world. Now I saw it for what it was. A long, patient lesson. He had been arming me for a war he prayed would never come. They say you never know how strong you are until being strong is the only choice you have. Looking at my sleeping grandson, his face so peaceful and innocent, I knew my choice had been made for me. We can't run, Marcus instructed, his voice pulling me back to the present. Sterling and his rival both have networks everywhere. They'll expect you to go to ground, so we're going to do the opposite. I want you to get off at the Port Authority bus terminal, the biggest, busiest transportation hub in the city. It was a terrifying, counterintuitive command. We were to walk directly into the lion's den. I gently woke Alex as the bus pulled into the sprawling, grimy terminal. The air was a cacophony of echoing announcements, rolling suitcases, and 1,000 overlapping conversations. The sheer number of people was overwhelming, but Marcus was right. In the chaos, we were anonymous. With Alex's hand locked in mine and the tote bag heavy on my shoulder, I navigated the river of humanity, following Marcus's instructions. Find the main concourse, he'd ordered. There will be a large backlit city map for tourists. Go there. We found it near a row of ticket counters. It was a massive, detailed map of the city, every street and landmark illuminated from behind. It was the kind of map I'd seen 100 times, but this time I was looking at it through Frank's eyes. Frank believed in patterns, Marcus had explained. Look for a sequence of street names related to his passion, to the sea. My eyes scanned the grid of lines and names, and then I saw it. A small cluster of streets in the old industrial waterfront district. Anchor Street, followed by Compass, then Triton, then a street named after a long-dead naval admiral. But the fifth street in the sequence, breaking the pattern, was named after a poet. Shelley Street. The anomaly. Just as Frank had taught me. My gaze followed the line of Shelley Street across the map until it intersected with a landmark. A small, almost invisible icon of a book. The waterfront branch of the public library, a beautiful old building I hadn't visited in years. That was it. That was the next step. Not a destination, but a message. A location where Frank had hidden the next piece of the puzzle. A surge of adrenaline, of fierce, defiant hope coursed through me. Frank had left me a path. He had trusted me to find it. I went to the ticket counter, my mind racing. The location was on the west side of the city. I bought 2 one-way tickets on a bus heading north, a bus that would leave in 1 hour from a gate on the far side of the terminal. It was a decoy, a ghost trail for anyone watching the manifest. I found a secluded corner in the waiting area, settling Alex on the hard plastic seat beside me. He was asleep again almost instantly. For the first time since that devastating phone call from the bank, I felt a flicker of control. I was no longer just a victim running from a storm. I was a navigator, reading my husband's last map. Then the burner phone vibrated in my pocket. My heart leaped into my throat. I expected it to be Marcus, confirming our next move. But the screen was blank, displaying only 2 words. Unknown caller. A cold finger of dread traced its way down my spine. I hesitated, then answered, holding the phone to my ear without speaking. For a moment, there was only static. Then a voice came through, a synthetic, digitally distorted sound that was neither male nor female. It was a voice scrubbed clean of all humanity, and it spoke a single terrifying sentence that turned my blood to ice. Run as far as you want, Patricia. All roads lead back to us. I remember taking Leo to this very library when he was 6 years old. The memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp, as the taxi pulled up to the grand, stone-faced building. I could almost feel the phantom weight of his small hand in mine, see the awe on his face as he stared up at the towering shelves inside. It was our sanctuary then, a fortress built of stories and quiet wonder. Now, that calm domestic memory was a ghost, a taunting reminder of a life that had been burned to the ground. I was leading another child, his son, into the same fortress, not to discover fairy tales, but to navigate a nightmare, with the howling of real monsters echoing in my ears from that horrifying phone call. The distorted voice lingered, a toxic residue in my mind. All roads lead back to us. The words were a promise and a threat, designed to paralyze me with fear. What do you do when the path to safety is the one that feels the most dangerous? I had to trust Frank. I had to trust the map. I paid the taxi driver with one of the $100 bills, my hand shaking as I took the change. We walked up the stone steps, Alex's small body pressed close to my side. The moment we stepped inside, the familiar scent of old paper, binding glue, and floor polish wrapped around me like a shroud. It was the smell of my former life, of safety and order, and the grief it produced was so potent, so absolute, that it almost brought me to my knees. The main reading room was a cathedral of silence, broken only by the soft rustle of turning pages and the occasional cough. I tried the burner phone again, hoping for Marcus, for some guidance, but the line was dead. No signal. I was on my own. Frank's instructions, filtered through Marcus, had led me here. But where was the next clue? My mind raced, sifting through memories of my husband, searching for a key. He was a man of systems, of order. My eyes scanned the library directory. Cartography, section 912. It was on the second floor. I led Alex to a small table, a secluded spot behind a globe as tall as I was. I need you to sit here for a minute, sweetie, I whispered, my voice tight. I'm just going to look for a book Grandpa wanted me to find. He nodded, his eyes wide and serious. He pulled the tattered copy of Treasure Island from the tote bag, a book I'd grabbed instinctively before we fled, and opened it on the table, creating a small island of normalcy in a sea of terror. The cartography section was at the end of a long, dim corridor. The air here was even older, thick with the dust of forgotten voyages and ancient coastlines. I ran my fingers along the spines of the books, the rough, dry texture of the old cloth bindings a grounding sensation. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was looking for an anomaly, a book that didn't belong, a hidden message. But there was nothing, just rows upon rows of atlases and survey maps, all in perfect, silent order. Despair began to creep in, cold and numbing. The phone call had been a warning. They knew. They were coming. Time was running out. I was about to turn away, to admit defeat, when I felt a small tug on my sleeve. It was Alex. He had left his post at the table and followed me. He didn't say a word. He just pointed. He wasn't pointing at the cartography section. He was pointing across the aisle, to the juvenile fiction section opposite us. Specifically, at a worn, blue-bound copy of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. "Grandma," he said, his voice a small, clear chime in the silence. "Remember what Grandpa always said? The real treasure isn't on the map. It's on the river." It was another one of Frank's sayings, something he'd repeat whenever we read adventure stories together. I had thought it was a lesson about life's journey. It was a clue. I pulled the book from the shelf. On the spine, where the Dewey Decimal call number should have been, was a custom label printed in a strange, blocky font. It wasn't a library number. It was a sequence, F81.3, T92. It was gibberish to me. But Alex, a child raised on computers and code, saw it instantly. "It's a different kind of address," he whispered, his eyes bright with discovery. "Look, T92, like the map books, and F81.3. That's Mark Twain's author number." My mind, the mind of a librarian, finally caught up. It was a cross-reference. A code hidden in the library's own language. We hurried back to the 912 section, my heart pounding with renewed purpose. I scanned the spines, looking for the book that corresponded with the number from Huck Finn. And there it was. An obscure, dusty tome titled A Mariner's Guide to Celestial Navigation. It was old, the cover faded to a dull sea gray. With trembling hands, I opened it. The pages were filled with complex charts and diagrams of stars. It seemed perfectly ordinary. I was about to close it, my hopes sinking once more, when Alex, standing on his toes to see, pointed to the inside of the back cover. "What's that?" he asked. There was a thin, raised line, almost invisible against the cardboard. I ran my fingernail along it and realized it was a slit, a hidden pocket. My breath hitched. I carefully worked the object out of the slit. It wasn't a note. It wasn't a key. It was a stiff, rectangular piece of manila cardstock, about the size of a dollar bill. It was covered in a grid of tiny, rectangular holes. An old computer punch card, a relic from the dawn of the digital age. It was a key that belonged to a lock that hadn't existed for 50 years. It held a message I had no possible way of reading. The burner phone buzzed to life the second we slipped out of the library's side exit and into the cold, damp air of a narrow alleyway. My heart leaped into my throat, but the screen read, M. It was Marcus. "Patricia, you can't stay there," he said, his voice a low, urgent hum. "That call wasn't a guess. They're tracking the phone, but they're tracking it slow. They want to see where you lead them." I clutched the nonsensical punch card in my hand, a useless relic. "Marcus, I found the next step, but it makes no sense. It's a card." "I know," he cut in. "I was hoping you would. Now listen to me, this is the most important part. Frank's contingency plan, his real ace in the hole. It was never about you. It was always about the boy." The words hung in the air between us, a long hidden secret finally seeing the light. I looked down at Alex, whose small face was illuminated by the glow of a distant street lamp. "Frank saw it in him years ago," Marcus continued, his voice filled with a strange mix of reverence and urgency. "The way his mind works. He doesn't just see shapes, he sees systems, patterns. Frank was an analog genius, but he knew the future was digital. He built a lock that only Alex could open. He gave me an address, a building on the campus of the city university, and told me a key would be waiting for me under a loose brick by the service entrance. Frank used to volunteer there, he said, in the historical archives. Another piece of my husband's secret life slotting into place. We took another taxi, moving through the city's glittering veins like fugitives. I felt a profound shift inside me. I was no longer just a protector. I was a conduit, a bridge between a grandfather's incredible foresight and a grandson's unique brilliance. We found the key exactly where Marcus said it would be. The archives building was dark and silent, our footsteps echoing unnaturally in the cavernous, marble-floored hallway. The room was in the sub-basement, behind a door marked Applied Systems Archive. The air inside was cool and still, thick with the distinct electronic smell of old capacitors and dust. It was a tomb of forgotten technology. Hulking machines with reel-to-reel tapes and massive hard drives sat like sleeping giants. In the center of the room, on a metal desk, was a single squat terminal with a thick, green glass screen and a narrow slot on its side. A card reader. It was a ghost from a world I barely recognized. My own knowledge, my lifetime of experience, was useless here. I felt a familiar wave of despair. We were so close, yet the final step was written in a language I couldn't read. I looked at Alex. He wasn't scared. He was curious, his eyes wide with a focused intensity that reminded me so much of Frank. He took the punch card from my trembling hand, his small fingers tracing the pattern of rectangular holes. He held it up to the dim light from the hallway, turning it over and over. A slow smile spread across his face, and it wasn't the smile of a child. It was the smile of an expert who had just found the elegant, simple solution to a complex problem. He looked up at me, his eyes clear and certain, and spoke the words that would echo in my heart forever. "Grandma," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Don't worry. I handled it." He walked over to the terminal, his small shoulders squared with a purpose that defied his age. He didn't hesitate. He fed the card into the slot, not flat, but sideways, in a way I never would have considered. The machine, silent for decades, whirred to life. A low hum filled the room, and a series of loud, rhythmic clicks began to emanate from its metallic guts, the sound of a mechanical mind waking from a long slumber. The green screen flickered, and a single cursor blinked in the top left corner. Then, lines of text began to scroll rapidly up the screen. Numbers, dates, and unfamiliar names. My breath caught in my throat. It was a ledger, a secret history of transactions. Then the scrolling stopped. The screen was filled with damning, irrefutable evidence. Offshore bank account numbers, shipping lane coordinates for illegal cargo, and a list of payments. It was Silas Sterling's entire operation, laid bare. It was the sword Frank had left for me. But as I stared, speechless, a new line of text blinked into existence at the bottom of the screen. A single flashing prompt that made the air freeze in my lungs. Inbound message detected. Source: Leo. Display YN. My son's betrayal had come in waves. The theft, the cruel note, the web of lies that had endangered our lives. I thought I had seen the worst of him, the absolute floor of his depravity. But as Alex's small finger hovered over the Y on the ancient keyboard, I was about to learn that the bottom was a place my son could always dig deeper. With a soft click, he pressed the key. The message from Leo blinked onto the screen, a final desperate act of treachery that eclipsed everything that had come before. I know you found Dad's box, it read. The map is a fake. I have the real one. Sterling is closing in on me. Give me the ledger data from the computer, and I'll trade you the map. It's my only way out. Don't call the police. You have 1 hour. This is your only chance to get Dad's legacy back. The audacity of it left me breathless. He was trying to barter with his father's soul, holding our love and memory hostage to save his own skin. He had learned nothing. He was a black hole, consuming everything good and leaving only emptiness behind. In that moment, staring at the glowing green text, the last vestiges of maternal love in my heart finally withered and died. I picked up the burner phone, my hands steady for the first time in days, and called Marcus. I read him the message, my voice as cold and flat as a gravestone. There was a moment of silence on the other end, and then a low, grim chuckle. "He's a cornered rat, Patricia," Marcus said, "and cornered rats will chew off their own limbs to escape. He doesn't have the map. He's lying. He wants the ledger to sell to Sterling's rival. He's trying to betray everyone, one last time." The pieces of the endgame began to click into place, a terrible, beautiful machine designed by my husband, navigated by me, and operated by my grandson. We were not the victims. We were the trap. "What do we do?" I asked. But I already knew the answer. "We give them all what they want," Marcus said, his voice hardening with tactical precision. "Alex is going to send 3 messages. The first, to a secure tip line for the FBI's Art Crime Division, will contain a single file from this ledger, proof of a massive shipment Sterling is receiving tonight at the waterfront. The second, an anonymous message to Sterling, will tell him his rival is meeting a new seller at that same location to acquire Frank's map. The third message goes to the rival, telling him Sterling is waiting there to ambush him. It was a masterstroke of chaos. A triangle of betrayal, with all 3 points converging on one location. And in the center of it all, the bait. My son. Alex's fingers flew across the keyboard, his face illuminated by the green glow of the screen. He was no longer a child in danger. He was a silent, efficient warrior, wielding lines of code like a sword. Within minutes, the messages were sent. 3 digital arrows shot into the heart of the underworld. Then, we waited. An hour later, as Marcus guided us through the dark, silent university campus to a waiting car, the burner phone rang. It was Leo. I answered and put it on speaker. The sound that came through was not his voice. It was a raw, animalistic scream of terror, punctuated by the unmistakable sound of sirens wailing in the background. "Mom, you set me up!" he shrieked, his voice cracking with disbelief and panic. "The police are everywhere. Sterling is here. They're going to kill me. How could you do this to me? I'm your son." I looked at Alex, who sat beside me in the back of the car, his expression calm and resolute. I thought of Frank, of his quiet strength and secret preparations. I thought of the life that had been stolen from me, and the new one I was fighting to build. The sirens on his end of the line grew louder, a chorus of justice arriving at last. "No, Leo," I said, and the sound of my own voice surprised me with its strength. "You stopped being my son the day you decided my love was worth less than my money." I ended the call and tossed the burner phone out of the car window. It skittered across the pavement and disappeared into the darkness, taking the last ghost of my old life with it. The news reports the next day called it the biggest organized crime bust in the city's history. 2 rival syndicates dismantled in a single night, their leaders arrested in a hail of confusion and accusation at an abandoned warehouse. And caught in the middle of it all was a pathetic, terrified young man named Leo, the unwitting catalyst for it all. We never went back to the house. We drove north, into the mountains, to the small, secluded cabin that Frank had left for me. It was simple, quiet, and safe. It was a home built not on 50 years of memories, but on a single, unbreakable foundation of love and survival. They say blood is thicker than water, that the bonds of family are absolute. But I've learned that sometimes the only way to survive is to cut the ties that are trying to pull you under. You must choose your family not by the blood you share, but by the loyalty and love they show. Alex and I have built a new life here, a quiet one. He is the true keeper of Frank's legacy, not a map on a piece of paper, but a mind that sees the patterns, a heart that understands loyalty, and a spirit that knows how to be brave. And as for me, I have finally learned to be strong. What do you think is the most important quality in a family? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And thank you for coming on this journey with me.